She thought her platinum credit card and a first-class ticket gave her the right to choose who sat next to her. She thought she could look down on a man just because of the color of his skin. Eleanor Vance believed she was the queen of the sky until the moment the cockpit door opened and the captain walked out, not to serve her, but to end her. She didn't realize the man she was trying to kick off the plane wasn't just a passenger. He was the one man who held her entire future in his hands. This is the story of how arrogance met altitude and karma hit harder than a plane crash. The stale recycled air of JFK International Airport usually smelled of stress and cheap coffee, but inside the Pegasus Alliance first-class lounge, the air smelled of lilies and money. Mrs. Eleanor Vance adjusted the collar of her cream-colored Chanel blazer, checking her reflection in the dark glass of the lounge window. At 55, Eleanor wore her wealth like a suit of armor. Her hair was a stiff blonde helmet that didn't move when she turned her head. Her skin was pulled tight, the result of excellent surgeons in Switzerland, and her eyes were the color of cold steel. She was the CEO of Vance Interiors, a luxury design firm that catered to the top 1% of Manhattan. But the truth, known only to her and her accountant, was that Vance Interiors was bleeding. She was flying to London for the meeting of a lifetime. The Sterling Group, a massive shadowy conglomerate involving tech and real estate, was looking for a lead designer for their new $4 billion headquarters. If Eleanor landed this contract, she was saved. If she didn't, she was bankrupt. "Champagne, Mrs. Vance?" a waiter asked, appearing at her elbow. "Only if it's the Dom Perignon," she said without looking at him. "And make sure the glass is actually clean this time." She checked her watch. A Patek Philippe. It was time to board. Flight 909 to London Heathrow. It was a flagship route for British Royal Airways. Eleanor gathered her Louis Vuitton carry-on and marched toward the gate. She didn't wait in lines. Lines were for people who bought tickets on sale. She bypassed the snaking queue of exhausted families and backpackers, flashing her boarding pass at the gate agent with a look that said, "Don't you dare speak to me." "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Vance," the flight attendant at the door said, beaming a practiced smile. Her name tag read, Sarah. "You're in seat 1A today. A lovely choice." "It's the only choice," Eleanor muttered, stepping onto the plush carpet of the aircraft. She loved this moment. The turn left. The separation from the herd. The first-class cabin was intimate with only 8 suites. It was a sanctuary of swans and exclusivity. She wanted to relax, drink 3 glasses of vintage champagne, and review her pitch for the Sterling Group. She needed to be perfect. Eleanor reached seat 1A and stopped dead in her tracks. Her sanctuary had been breached. Sitting in seat 1B, directly across the aisle from her, was a man. He was African-American, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple grey hoodie and black track pants. He had large noise-cancelling headphones on and was tapping away on an iPad. He looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Eleanor's grip tightened on her designer bag. Her lip curled slightly. In her world, the world of Upper East Side galas and Hampton's garden parties, people like him were the help. They were the drivers, the security guards, the movers. They didn't sit in 1B. She stood in the aisle, blocking the path of a businessman behind her. She didn't sit down. She stared at the man, waiting for him to notice her, to shrink away, to realize he was in the wrong place. The man didn't look up. He turned a page on his iPad, his face calm, unbothered. Eleanor felt a spike of irrational heat in her chest. How dare he? How dare he sit there with such casual ownership of a space that cost $12,000? A ticket. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The man didn't hear her. "Excuse me," she said louder. The man blinked, slid one ear cup of his headphones back and looked up. His eyes were dark, deep, and intelligent. He offered a polite, faint smile. "Yes." "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Eleanor asked, her tone dripping with fake concern. "Economy boarding is actually through the second door. You're quite lost." The man looked at his boarding pass, sitting on the console, then back at her. 1B. I'm pretty sure I'm found." He slid his headphone back over his ear and returned to his screen. Eleanor stood there, mouth slightly agape. The dismissal was absolute. The businessman behind her cleared his throat. "Ma'am, could you sit? You're blocking the aisle." Eleanor slammed her bag into the overhead bin and threw herself into seat 1A. She wasn't going to let this go. This was her flight, her atmosphere, and it was already ruined. The plane taxied to the runway, the engines whining as they spooled up. Eleanor stared out the window, but her reflection showed her eyes darting constantly to the right. The man in 1B, let's call him the intruder, she thought was quiet. He wasn't doing anything wrong, technically. He wasn't loud. He didn't smell. He was just there. And for a woman like Eleanor Vance, whose entire life was built on exclusion and hierarchy, his presence was an itch she couldn't scratch. She pressed the call button. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Sarah, the flight attendant, appeared instantly, kneeling beside Eleanor's suite to maintain eye level. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Vance? Can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" "I don't want a beverage, Sarah," Eleanor hissed, leaning in close so the man wouldn't hear, though she didn't care much if he did. "I want to know what is going on with the seating arrangement." Sarah looked confused. "I'm sorry the cabin is full today, but I specifically booked 1A for privacy," Eleanor interrupted. "I expected a certain demographic of neighbor, a certain professional atmosphere." Sarah's smile faltered. She glanced across the aisle at the man in 1B, who was now reading a hardcover book. "Sir, Mr. Sterling is a frequent flyer with us, ma'am. I don't care who he is," Eleanor snapped. "He looks like a rapper or a basketball player. It makes me uncomfortable. I have confidential documents to review. I can't have someone like that looking over my shoulder." "Mrs. Vance?" Sarah said, her voice hardening slightly. "Mr. Sterling has not looked at you once. He is a Platinum Key member. I cannot move him." "Then move me," Eleanor demanded. "Is there another seat in first?" "First is full, ma'am. Business class. Full. We are overbooked." Eleanor let out a huff of disbelief. "So you expect me to sit here for 7 hours, feeling threatened?" Sarah blinked. "Threatened? Has he spoken to you? Has he made any aggressive gestures?" "It's his energy," Eleanor said, waving her hand vaguely. "It's aggressive. It's too much. Look, I know how these airlines work. You have protocols for passenger comfort. I am a gold medallion flyer. I demand you do something. He clearly doesn't belong here. Did he upgrade with miles? Did he win a contest? Mrs. Vance, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your voice down." Sarah whispered, her cheeks flushing pink. "You are disturbing the cabin." "I'm disturbing the cabin." Eleanor's voice rose an octave. She wanted a scene. Scenes usually got her what she wanted. "I am the victim here. I paid $12,000 for peace and quiet, not to sit next to someone from the hood." The cabin went silent. The hum of the engines seemed to drop away. The man in 1B stopped reading. He didn't turn his head, but his hand froze on the page. Sarah stood up, her face pale. "Ma'am, that is enough. I will not tolerate discriminatory language on this flight." "Discriminatory?" Eleanor laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "I'm being a realist. Look at him, hoodies and sweatpants in first class. It's disgraceful. I bet he's dealing drugs. I bet that bag of his is full of cash. I don't feel safe." She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, towering over the kneeling flight attendant. "Get the captain," Eleanor commanded. "Now, I'm not taking off until this situation is rectified. Either he goes back to economy where he belongs, or I'm filing a lawsuit that will own this airline." From the back of the cabin, a few passengers were craning their necks. A young woman in 2A was filming with her phone. The man in 1B, Mr. Sterling, finally closed his book. He placed it gently on the tray table. He turned his head slowly to look Eleanor in the eye. His expression wasn't angry. It was something far worse. It was pity. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and resonant like a cello, "I suggest you sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." "Don't you speak to me," Eleanor shrieked, recoiling as if he had slapped her. "Sarah, get the pilot, now." Sarah nodded curtly. "Right away, Mrs. Vance." She turned and marched toward the cockpit, punching the code into the secure door. Eleanor crossed her arms, a smug smile touching her lips. She had won. The captain would come out. He would see a distinguished, wealthy white woman in distress and a large black man in a hoodie. She knew how the world worked. She knew whose side the system was on. She looked at Mr. Sterling. "Hope you enjoyed the pre-flight drink," she sneered, "because you'll be walking back to row 45 in a minute." Mr. Sterling didn't respond. He just picked up his glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cockpit door clicked and hissed open. The man who emerged was not what Eleanor expected. Captain Richard "Rick" O'Malley was a legend in the aviation world, though Eleanor didn't know that. He was a man in his late 50s with silver hair, a jaw like a granite block, and 4 gold stripes on his shoulders that commanded absolute authority. He had flown fighter jets in the Gulf War before moving to commercial aviation. He had zero tolerance for nonsense. He stepped into the first-class cabin, putting his cap back on his head. The air pressure in the room seemed to change. Sarah whispered urgently to him, gesturing toward seat 1A and then 1B. Captain O'Malley listened, his face an unreadable mask. He nodded once, then walked slowly toward the front row. Eleanor straightened her posture. Here was the authority figure, the ally. "Captain," Eleanor said, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial, victimized tone. "Thank God you're here. This stewardess is completely incompetent. I've been trying to explain that I have a serious safety concern regarding this passenger." She pointed a manicured finger at Mr. Sterling. Captain O'Malley stood in the aisle looking at Eleanor, then down at Mr. Sterling. "Mrs. Vance, is it?" the captain asked. His voice was gravel and calm. "Yes, Eleanor Vance, CEO of Vance Interiors." "And you feel unsafe?" "Incredibly," Eleanor said, pressing a hand to her chest. "He's been lurking. His attire is threatening, and when I asked him to move, he was aggressive. I simply cannot fly next to him. It's too many of them in this cabin. It creates a hostile environment." The racism hung in the air, naked and ugly. Captain O'Malley stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. "So you are requesting that the passenger in 1B be removed from this section, so you can feel comfortable." "Exactly," Eleanor said, relief washing over her. "I knew you would understand. A man of your standing knows that standards must be maintained." "I agree," O'Malley said. "Standards are everything." He turned to the man in 1B. Eleanor smirked. "Here it comes." "Good evening, sir," Captain O'Malley said to the man. "I apologize for the delay in our departure." The man in the hoodie nodded. "No problem, Rick. How's the wife?" "She recovered from the surgery." Eleanor froze. Rick Captain O'Malley smiled a genuine warm smile that transformed his face. "She did, sir. She's back on her feet. Thanks for sending the flowers. That was a class act." "Least I could do," the man said. Eleanor's brain was misfiring. She looked between the pilot and the man she had called a thug. "Wait. You know him?" Captain O'Malley turned back to Eleanor. The smile vanished instantly. His eyes were like ice. "Mrs. Vance," O'Malley said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "The man you are harassing is Dr. Julian Sterling." "Doctor?" Eleanor stammered. "Doctor?" "Sterling is a former U.S. ambassador." O'Malley continued listing the credentials with military precision. "He is a Rhodes Scholar. He sits on the board of directors for the International Aviation Safety Council. And perhaps most importantly, for you." O'Malley paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "He is the founding partner of Global Air Logistics." Eleanor blinked. I don't know what that is." "You wouldn't," O'Malley said. "But you might know the company that Global Air just bought a controlling stake in last week." He gestured around the cabin. "British Royal Airways." The blood drained from Eleanor's face so fast she felt dizzy. "This man," O'Malley pointed to Julian, "owns this airplane. He owns the seat you are sitting in. Technically Mrs. Vance. He pays my salary." Dr. Julian Sterling finally spoke. He turned to Eleanor, his face calm but his eyes piercing. "I prefer to fly incognito," he said smoothly. "I like to see how my crew treats the passengers, and how the passengers treat each other. It's very illuminating." Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was drowning. "Now," Captain O'Malley said, standing up to his full height. "You mentioned that you felt unsafe. You mentioned that the environment was hostile. Under FAA regulations, if a passenger declares they feel unsafe to fly, I am obligated to remove the source of that conflict." "Yes." Eleanor grasped at the straw. "Exactly. The conflict." "The conflict," O'Malley interrupted, "is you, Mrs. Vance. Excuse me. You have disrupted my flight crew. You have used hate speech against a fellow passenger. And you have delayed my takeoff. I have zero tolerance for racism on my ship." O'Malley pulled a radio from his belt. "Tower, this is Flight 909. We need to return to the gate. Passenger removal. Requesting airport police to meet us at the jetway." "Copy that, 909. "No," Eleanor screamed, the reality crashing down on her. "You can't do this. I have a meeting. I have to be in London." "Do you know how much this ticket cost?" "I don't care," O'Malley said. He looked at Sarah. "Get her bags." The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from tense silence to an electric buzz of anticipation. The seatbelt sign pinged off, not because they were safe to move about, but because the plane was no longer going anywhere. 2 officers from the Port Authority Police Department boarded the aircraft. They weren't smiling. They were heavy-set men in dark blue uniforms, their belts heavy with radios, tasers, and handcuffs. The lead officer, a man with a name tag reading Sergeant Miller, scanned the first-class cabin. "Who's the problem here?" Miller asked, his voice flat. Captain O'Malley stepped out of the cockpit again. He pointed a thumb toward Seat 1A. "Ms. Vance refuses to deplane. She has disrupted the flight crew, delayed departure, and harassed a passenger. I want her off my aircraft. Now!" Eleanor Vance was clutching the armrests of her leather seat so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked at the police officers with a mix of terror and entitlement. "Officers," she said, her voice trembling but attempting to sound authoritative. "This is a misunderstanding. I am the victim here. That man," she gestured vaguely toward Julian, "threatened me. The captain is biased. I'm a personal friend of the police commissioner. If you touch me, I will have your badges." Sergeant Miller didn't blink. He had heard the "I know the commissioner" line 3 times already that week. It never ended well for the passenger. "Ma'am, the captain has the final say on who flies," Miller said, stepping into her personal space. "Once he orders you off, you are trespassing. You have 2 choices. Option A, you grab your bag, walk off with us voluntarily, and we deal with this at the precinct. Option B, we drag you off in handcuffs and you spend the night in a cell at Queen's Central Booking. We prefer Option A." Eleanor looked around the cabin for support. The businessman behind her was checking his watch, annoyed. The young woman in 2A was still filming the red light of her phone, recording every second of Eleanor's meltdown. Sarah, the flight attendant, was standing by the door with Eleanor's Louis Vuitton carry-on already in her hand, waiting. "This is ridiculous," Eleanor spat. "I have a meeting in London worth millions." "Not tonight, you don't," Miller said. He reached down and unclicked her seatbelt. "Let's go." Eleanor realized with a sinking horror that no one was coming to save her. She stood up, her legs wobbly. She smoothed her Chanel blazer, trying to regain a shred of dignity. She grabbed her purse and stepped into the aisle. She had to walk past Seat 1B. Dr. Julian Sterling didn't look up. He had put his noise-cancelling headphones back on. He was reading his book again. To him, she had ceased to exist. That indifference hurt Eleanor more than any insult could have. He wasn't angry. He was just above her. "Move it along, ma'am," Officer Miller said, putting a hand on her back to guide her. "Don't touch me," she snapped. They reached the galley. Sarah handed the bag to the officer. "Have a nice evening, Mrs. Vance," Sarah said, her voice dripping with professional sweetness. But the nightmare wasn't over, because the jet bridge wasn't connected to the first-class door anymore due to the repositioning. They had to exit through the main door, past the first few rows of Comfort Plus. As Eleanor was escorted past the curtain, a ripple of applause started. It began with one person clapping, then another. Within seconds, 50 people in the front of the economy cabin were clapping and cheering. "Bye, Karen," someone shouted from row 12. "Enjoy the no-fly list," another voice yelled. Eleanor kept her head high, staring straight ahead. But inside, she was screaming. Her face burned with a heat that felt like sunburn. She was marched up the jetway, the cool air of the terminal hitting her face like a slap. As soon as they were inside the terminal, Sergeant Miller stopped. "All right, Mrs. Vance. You're being trespassed from British Royal Airways. They're filing a formal report. You are not to return to this terminal for 24 hours. "I need to get to London," Eleanor shrieked, the panic finally breaking through. "You don't understand. My company. Everything depends on this." "Then I suggest you find another airline," Miller said, turning to walk away. "And maybe check your attitude at check-in next time." Eleanor stood alone in the terminal, her $12,000 ticket, now a worthless piece of paper. She checked her phone. It was 8:45 p.m. The meeting with the Sterling Group was at 9:00 a.m. London time the next morning. She was stranded. She was humiliated. And she was desperate. Eleanor ran. The click-clack of her heels on the linoleum floor echoed as she sprinted toward the International Departures Board. She didn't have time to process the shame. Survival instinct had taken over. Vance Interiors was $3 million in debt. The bank had called yesterday, threatening to freeze her assets. The contract with the Sterling Group was the only lifeline left. If she missed that meeting, the house in the Hamptons, the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the reputation, it would all be seized. She would be destitute. She reached the counter for Transatlantic Express, a budget carrier she wouldn't normally be caught dead flying. "I need a ticket to London," she gasped, slamming her platinum card on the counter. "Tonight, right now," the agent, a tired-looking man named Gary, typed slowly. "Last flight leaves in 40 minutes. It's got a layover in Reykjavik." "I don't care," Eleanor said. "Book it." "It's economy only. Middle seat." Eleanor swallowed the bile rising in her throat. "Fine. Just get me on the plane." While Gary processed the ticket, Eleanor's phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it started vibrating continuously. She looked down. A text from her daughter, Jessica Mum. "What did you do?" Another text from her publicist. "Do not speak to anyone. Call me immediately." Eleanor frowned. She opened Twitter X. Trending number 1 in the United States. Brushed first class. Karen trending number 2. Julian Sterling trending number 3. British Royal Airways. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She tapped the top hashtag. There it was. The video. The girl in seat 2A had posted it 20 minutes ago. The caption read, "Woman tries to kick black man out of first class, finds out he owns the airline. The pilot is a savage." The video already had 4.2 million views. Eleanor watched herself on the tiny screen. She looked deranged. Her voice was shrill. "I expect a certain demographic. He looks like a rapper." The comments were scrolling so fast, she couldn't read them. Imagine being that rich and that broke in the brain. She just ended her whole career in 4K. Does she know who Julian Sterling is? That man is a literal genius and philanthropist. She messed with the wrong one. "Ma'am." Gary, the ticket agent, was holding out a boarding pass. "Boarding starts in 10 minutes. Gate B42. You'll have to run." Eleanor snatched the ticket. She turned off her phone. She couldn't deal with this now. If she landed the Sterling deal, she could spin this. She could say she was under medication. She could issue an apology. Money fixed everything. If she secured the $4 billion contract, the board would forgive a bad viral moment. They cared about profits, not Twitter. She had to believe that. The flight to Reykjavik was a nightmare. Eleanor sat in seat 22E, squeezed between a backpacker who smelled of damp wool and a crying toddler. Her legs cramped. She couldn't recline. She was served a cold sandwich wrapped in plastic. She closed her eyes and visualized the meeting. She had her pitch deck memorized. She knew the Sterling Group's aesthetic, modern, sustainable, luxurious. She was the best designer in New York. Talent would win out. She landed in Iceland at 6:00 a.m. local time, ran through the terminal, and barely made the connection to London Heathrow. She arrived in London at 11:30 a.m. She was late. The meeting was supposed to be a breakfast briefing at 9:00 a.m., but she had emailed her assistant to beg for a reschedule to 1:00 p.m. claiming a mechanical failure on her plane. Her assistant had replied just before Eleanor turned her phone off. They agreed to 100 p.m. But Mrs. Vance, the client, is very strict on time. Do not be late. Eleanor rushed into the airport bathroom at Heathrow. She changed into her backup outfit, a navy blue power suit, but it was wrinkled from being stuffed in her carry-on. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her hair, usually a perfect helmet, was flat and frizzy from the dry cabin air. She splashed cold water on her face. "You are Eleanor Vance," she whispered to the mirror. "You are a shark. You eat people like them for breakfast." She exited the terminal, hailed a black cab, and gave the driver the address. "The Shard," she commanded, "and step on it." The Shard pierced the grey London sky like a jagged spear of glass. It was a monument to power, money, and altitude. Eleanor rushed into the lobby at 12:55 p.m. She was running on adrenaline and caffeine. She checked in at the security desk. "Eleanor Vance to see the Sterling Group board," she said, breathless. The security guard checked a list. He paused, looking at her, then back at the list. He gave her a strange look. Was it pity? "Amusement, 11th floor," he said. "Conference room Alpha. They are expecting you." The elevator ride was smooth and silent. Eleanor used the reflection in the brass doors to apply one last layer of red lipstick. She put on her game face, the smile that said, "I am in control." The doors opened. The reception area was stark and intimidating. A young assistant, looking terrified, stood up. "Mrs. Vance, you're just in time. The board is seated." "Excellent," Eleanor said, breezing past her. "I'll show myself in." She pushed open the heavy double mahogany doors of Conference Room Alpha. The room was vast. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of London, but the grey rain outside made the room feel cold. At the centre was a massive table made of reclaimed black oak. Sitting around the table were 5 people. 3 men in expensive grey suits and 2 women who looked like they ran countries in their spare time. They were reviewing folders, her pitch folders. As Eleanor entered, the conversation stopped. The silence was absolute. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor said, projecting her voice. She walked to the front of the room, setting her bag down. "My apologies for the slight delay. The transatlantic crossing can be unpredictable. But I assure you, the vision I have for the Sterling headquarters is worth the wait." No one smiled. No one offered her water. They just stared at her, with a mix of fascination and disbelief. "You may begin," one of the women said icily. Eleanor launched into her pitch. She was good. Despite the exhaustion, despite the disaster of the last 24 hours, she was a professional. She talked about texture, light, the psychology of space. She showed her sketches. For 20 minutes, she owned the room. She felt the confidence returning. She was crushing it. And finally, Eleanor concluded Vance Interiors is not just about design. It is about values. We believe that a space reflects the character of the people who inhabit it. Excellence, integrity, and class. She smiled, waiting for the applause. There was none. From the far end of the table, a high-backed leather chair. The chairman's chair was turned away from her, facing the window and the rainy skyline. "Excellence," a deep voice said from the chair. "Integrity. Class." Eleanor froze. The voice. She knew that voice. It was a cello deep baritone that vibrated in her bones. "Those are interesting words, Mrs. Vance," the voice continued, "especially coming from you." The chair slowly swiveled around. Eleanor's knees buckled. She had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling. Sitting in the chairman's seat was Dr. Julian Sterling. He wasn't wearing the hoodie and sweatpants anymore. He was wearing a bespoke Savile Row suit that likely cost more than Eleanor's car. He looked regal, powerful, and utterly terrifying. Eleanor made a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. "You..." "Me," Julian said calmly. He steepled his fingers. "You see, Eleanor. Can I call you Eleanor? I feel we bonded on our flight." I didn't know," Eleanor stammered. The room was spinning. "I had no idea that I was the chairman of the Sterling Group," Julian finished for her. "Yes, that is the nature of the Sterling Group. It bears my name. Usually people who want to do business with me do a basic Google search." He picked up a remote control and pointed it at the large screen behind Eleanor. "You gave a wonderful presentation on design," Julian said, "but we have a strict policy here. We vet our partners thoroughly. We look for character fit." He pressed a button. The screen didn't show her architectural renderings. It showed the video, the viral video from the plane. Eleanor's voice filled the boardroom, shrieky and hateful. "It's too many of them in this cabin. It creates a hostile environment." The board members watched it stoically. Eleanor watched her life disintegrate. Julian paused the video right on Eleanor's snarling face. "This was taken yesterday," Julian said, "while you were on your way to ask me for $4 million. "Dr. Sterling, please." Eleanor begged, tears finally spilling over. "I was stressed. I have a fear of flying. That wasn't me. I am an ally I have donated to charities." "You tried to have me arrested," Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room. "You humiliated a flight attendant, and you judged a man based on the color of his skin and the clothes on his back." He stood up. He was tall, imposing. "I grew up in a neighborhood where people looked at me like you did yesterday," Julian said. "I worked my way from the bottom to this chair, and I promised myself that I would never let people like you win." He tossed her pitch folder onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and fell off the edge, landing on the floor with a dull thud. "Your proposal is rejected, Mrs. Vance." "Please," Eleanor sobbed. "My company. I'll lose everything. I'm in debt. I need this contract." "You should have thought about that before you decided you were too good to sit next to me," Julian said. He looked at the security guard waiting by the door. "Escort Mrs. Vance out," Julian commanded, "and make sure she takes the stairs. The elevators are for polite society." The command to take the stairs was not just an inconvenience. It was a dismantle of her dignity. Eleanor Vance stood in the hallway outside the mahogany doors of the boardroom, the heavy click of the lock sliding into place behind her, signaling the end of her life as she knew it. The security guard, a burly man named Thomas, who had watched the entire proceedings with a stoic expression, gestured toward the glowing green exit sign at the end of the corridor. "This way, Mrs. Vance," he said. His tone wasn't rude, but it lacked the deferential softness she was used to. It was the tone one used for a trespasser. Eleanor walked to the stairwell door. Her legs felt like lead. She was wearing 4-inch Louboutin heels, shoes designed for walking from a limousine to a restaurant table, not for descending 11 flights of industrial concrete stairs. She pushed the door open. The stairwell was cold, smelling of dust and unwashed concrete, the smell of the back end of the building, the places where the help moved unseen. Clack, clack, clack. Every step sent a shockwave of pain up her calves, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the screaming panic in her mind. Rejected. The word bounced around her skull. $4 billion. Gone. By the time she reached the ground floor, she was sweating. Her perfect blowout was beginning to frizz at the temples. She pushed open the heavy fire door and spilled out into a service alley behind the Shard. It was raining in London, a cold, grey, relentless drizzle that soaked through her navy power suit in seconds. There was no chauffeur waiting. No black car, just the smell of wet pavement and garbage bins. She reached into her purse with trembling hands and pulled out her phone. She had to call her CFO. She had to spin this. If she could just lie to the bank for another week, maybe she could find another investor. She turned the phone on. The device nearly vibrated out of her hand. Notifications cascaded down the screen in a blur of terrifying speed. 142 missed calls. 3,000 plus new emails. Instagram, 50K plus new comments. Hate speech filter active. She opened her text messages. The most recent one was from her chief financial officer, David. Eleanor. The bank saw the video. They are invoking the morality clause in our loan agreement. They've frozen the corporate accounts effective immediately. I'm resigning. Don't call me. She stared at the screen, the raindrops smearing the text. The morality clause. It was standard boilerplate in high-end business loans, a clause she had never bothered to read because she never thought Eleanor Vance would be considered immoral. She dialed her daughter Jessica. It rang once, twice. Then it went to voicemail. You've reached Jessica. If you're a friend, leave a message. If you're the press asking about my mother, go to hell. Eleanor gasped. Her own daughter. She stood alone in the alleyway, the water ruining her $800 shoes, and realized she had nowhere to go. She checked her banking app. Personal checking. $400, $200, and $300. Credit card. 1 declined. Credit card 2. Declined. The banks moved fast. In the digital age, financial ruin didn't take weeks, it took seconds. The algorithms had seen the risk of viral racist CEO, and the system had cauterized the wound to protect itself. Eleanor walked out of the alley onto the busy London street. She raised her hand to hail a black cab. A taxi slowed down the driver, looking at her through the rain-slicked window. Then he frowned. He squinted. He recognized her. The taxi light flicked off. The driver shook his head, revved the engine, and drove away, splashing a wave of dirty puddle water onto Eleanor's legs. She stood there, dripping wet, while the city of London moved around her. For the first time in 30 years, Eleanor Vance was invisible to the people she thought mattered, and all too visible to the people she had despised. She had to get to the airport. She had to get home. But there would be no first class this time. She walked to the nearest tube station, the London Underground. She fumbled with the ticket machine, her acrylic nails clicking frantically as she tried to buy a single fare with her debit card, praying there was enough cash left to cover the £6 ride. Approved. She moved through the turnstile and descended into the depths of the earth. The platform was crowded. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of ozone and humanity. When the train arrived, it was packed. Eleanor squeezed in, standing shoulder to shoulder with a construction worker, covered in drywall dust, and a young student listening to loud music. She clutched the metal pole, swaying as the train rattled through the dark tunnels. Across from her sat a black woman in a nurse's uniform, looking exhausted, likely coming off a 12-hour shift. The nurse looked up and locked eyes with Eleanor. Eleanor braced herself for a shout, an insult, a phone camera in her face. But the nurse just looked at her. She looked at the wet hair, the ruined suit, the terror in Eleanor's eyes. The nurse didn't pull out a phone. She didn't yell. She just shook her head slowly, a look of profound disappointment, and turned her gaze back to the floor. That silence was louder than any scream. It was the judgment of the world, quietly stepping away from her. 6 months later, the winter wind in Queens was sharper than it was in Manhattan. It didn't just bite, it gnawed. Eleanor Vance pulled the collar of her thrift store trench coat tighter around her neck as she stepped out of the Quick Staff employment agency. The doorbells jingled cheerfully behind her, a stark contrast to the crushing conversation she had just endured. She had spent 30 years building a resume that commanded fear and respect. CEO, visionary, leader. Today that resume was radioactive. The recruiter, a woman young enough to be Eleanor's granddaughter, had barely looked her in the eye. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance," the girl had said, chewing on a pen. But the background check flagged the incident. Our insurance doesn't cover high-risk employees. And honestly, the dental office saw the video. They said they have a diverse clientele. They don't think you're a culture fit. Culture fit. The same words Eleanor had used to fire 3 junior designers the year before. The irony tasted like ash in her mouth. Eleanor walked down the cracked sidewalk, head down, avoiding eye contact with passers-by. She wasn't Eleanor Vance, the design mogul, anymore. To the world, she was just a meme. A gif used to express entitlement. A cautionary tale with 50 million views. She checked her watch. It was a cheap plastic digital one she had bought at a pharmacy. Her Patek Philippe had been seized by the creditors in the first week. 1:45 p.m. She was late. She wasn't heading home to her studio apartment, a 300-square-foot walk-up in Astoria that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage. She was heading to the final dismantling of her former life. The auction house was a converted warehouse near the rail yards. It was a cavernous, drafty building where the debris of failed businesses and bankrupt lives came to be picked over by vultures. Eleanor slipped in through the back, finding a seat in the last row of folding metal chairs. She kept her scarf wrapped high around her face. She shouldn't have come. Her lawyer had told her to stay away, to let the trustees handle the liquidation. But she couldn't. It was a compulsion. She had to witness the death of her empire. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like a gravel mixer and no soul to speak of, stood on a podium under harsh fluorescent lights. "Item 402, he boomed into the microphone. "A set of 6 crystal decanters, Waterford, from the executive suite of Vance Interiors." Eleanor flinched. She remembered buying those. She had bought them in Dublin on a trip where she had flown private drank vintage wine and laughed at the idea of a budget. They had cost her $4,000. "Bidding starts at $50, the auctioneer said. $50. Eleanor griped the edges of her plastic chair. "They are Waterford," she wanted to scream. "They are hand-cut. 50, do I hear 60? Anyone 50, going once?" A hand went up in the second row, a man in a stained painter's jumpsuit. "Sold for $50 to number 114. The gavel banged. It sounded like a bone breaking. For the next hour, Eleanor watched her life being sold off by the pound. Her ergonomically designed office chairs went to a nail salon owner. Her collection of architectural art books, which she had curated for decades, was bought by a hipster couple who looked like they wanted them for aesthetic shelf filler. Then came the centerpiece. "Item 450. the auctioneer announced, gesturing to two movers who were grunting as they hauled a massive object onto the stage. The executive desk, imported Italian black marble, custom reinforced frame. This was the command center of the Vance firm. The desk. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, hot and stinging. That desk was her throne. She had sat behind that marble slab and felt like a god. It was cold, hard, and impenetrable, just like she had tried to be. She remembered the day it was installed. They had to use a crane to get it through the window of her Fifth Avenue office. It cost more than most people's cars. Who will start the bidding at 200? Silence filled the warehouse. The crowd shifted in their seats. A marble desk was heavy. It was impractical. It was a relic of an era of excess that no one in this room cared about. 100, the auctioneer asked, sounding bored. Come on, folks. It's solid stone. Good for chopping meat. Use it in a garage. A garage. Eleanor bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. $75, a voice called out from the side. Sold. $75. Eleanor closed her eyes. Her power, her legacy, her fortress, sold for the price of a dinner for two at a chain restaurant. She couldn't take it anymore. The air in the warehouse felt too thin, too dusty. She stood up, her knees popping, and turned to leave. She needed fresh air. She needed to get away from the sound of that gavel. As she navigated the aisle, keeping her head down, she bumped into a couple entering the warehouse. "Oh, excuse me," Eleanor mumbled, clutching her purse to her chest. "No worries," the man said. He sounded cheerful, light. Eleanor froze. She didn't know the man, but she knew the woman holding his hand. Standing in the doorway, bathed in the grey afternoon light, was Sarah, the flight attendant from British Royal Airways. Sarah looked different. She wasn't wearing the stiff uniform and the practiced smile of a service worker. She was wearing a soft cashmere coat, designer boots, and a sparkling diamond ring on her left hand. She looked radiant, healthy, and unburdened. Eleanor tried to shrink into her trench coat. She tried to become invisible. "Please," she prayed. "Don't see me. Not here, not like this." But Sarah's eyes, sharp from years of scanning cabins for trouble, locked onto Eleanor. The recognition was instant. Sarah stopped mid-laugh. Her expression shifted from joy to confusion, and then to a slow, dawning realization. She looked at Eleanor's grey hair, the frizz, the cheap coat, the lines of exhaustion etched deep into her face. Then Sarah looked past Eleanor toward the stage where the movers were shoving Eleanor's marble desk onto a dolly. Sarah put the pieces together. She didn't need to ask. The silence between them stretched for 10 seconds, but it felt like 10 years. Eleanor braced herself. She expected Sarah to laugh. She expected her to pull out a phone and film the aftermath. She expected Sarah to say, "Karma is a bitch, isn't it?" Eleanor deserved it. She knew she deserved it. But Sarah didn't do any of that. Sarah's face softened. The anger that might have been there 6 months ago was gone, replaced by something far more devastating. Pity. Sarah squeezed her fiancé's hand. "Wait here a second, babe," she said softly. She took a step toward Eleanor. Eleanor flinched, physically stepping back. "Mrs. Vance," Sarah said. Her voice was not the servant's voice Eleanor remembered. It was the voice of an equal, no, a superior. Eleanor's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, trying to summon a shred of her old dignity, but finding the cupboard bare. "Hello, Sarah." "I heard about the bankruptcy," Sarah said. not unkindly. "I didn't know it was this complete. The market's turn." Eleanor whispered a lie she told herself to sleep at night. "I am restructuring." Sarah looked at the auction stage, then back at Eleanor. She reached into her purse. Eleanor stiffened. Was she going to offer her money? If she offered a $20 bill, Eleanor thought she might actually die of shame right there on the concrete floor. Sarah pulled out a card. It wasn't money. It was a business card. "My fiancé and I are starting a catering business," Sarah said. "We're doing well. We need people for the wash-up crew on weekends. It's hard work. It's minimum wage. But it's a paycheck." She held the card out. Eleanor stared at the small rectangle of white cardstock. The wash-up crew. Scrapes plates. Hauling trash. 6 months ago, Eleanor would have thrown a drink in the face of anyone who suggested such a thing. She would have had them fired. She would have destroyed them. Now her stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, which had been a slice of toast. Her rent was due in 3 days. Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached out. Her manicured claws were gone, replaced by short, brittle nails. She took the card. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered. The words felt like broken glass in her throat. "Take care, Eleanor," Sarah said. She didn't say Mrs. Vance this time. She used her first name. The hierarchy was gone. Sarah turned and walked back to her fiancé. They laughed at something he whispered, turned and walked deeper into the auction house, perhaps to buy a vase that used to sit on Eleanor's mantel. Eleanor stumbled out the door into the alleyway. She gasped for air, clutching the business card so tight the corners dug into her palm. She walked 4 blocks to the bus stop. It started to rain, a cold, miserable New York drizzle that soaked through her cheap coat in seconds. The bus shelter was crowded. Eleanor squeezed in, standing shoulder to shoulder with the people she had spent a lifetime avoiding. There was a construction worker smelling of sweat and drywall, a teenage girl popping gum and listening to loud music leaking from her headphones, an elderly woman with 2 heavy grocery bags resting on her swollen ankles. The Q60 bus groaned to a halt in front of them, screeching its brakes. It was packed. Eleanor shuffled on board. There were no seats. She moved to the center, grabbing a greasy metal pole to steady herself as the bus lurched forward, swaying through the potholed streets of Queens. Eleanor felt the press of bodies against her. She was jostled. She was bumped. Someone stepped on her foot. "Watch it," a man grunted. "Sorry," Eleanor said automatically. She looked out the rain-streaked window. The city was grey and blurring past. Then the bus stopped at a red light. Directly outside the window, towering over the street, was a massive digital billboard. The image changed cycling from a soda ad to a new campaign. It was an advertisement for Global Air Logistics and British Royal Airways. The photo was high-definition, glossy and vibrant. It featured the interior of a first-class cabin. Standing in the aisle, looking powerful and benevolent, was Dr. Julian Sterling. He was shaking hands with Captain Rick O'Malley. They both looked like titans. But it was the tagline underneath that stopped Eleanor's heart. In bold gold typography, the billboard read, "Character is your real currency. Fly with integrity. Fly global." Eleanor stared at the face of the man she had tried to kick off a plane. He was 50 feet tall, glowing in the gloom of the city. He owned the Scumway. He owned the message. And she. The bus hit a bump, throwing Eleanor off balance. She stumbled, nearly falling into the elderly woman with the groceries. Eleanor instinctively reached out and grabbed the woman's arm to steady her, preventing the groceries from spilling. "Oh," the old woman gasped. She looked up at Eleanor with wide, fearful eyes. Eleanor let go gently. "I'm sorry," she said. "Are you all right?" The woman smiled, a genuine, toothless, tired smile. "I'm fine, dear. Thank you. These bags are heavy." "Here," Eleanor said, looking at the heavy plastic bags cutting into the woman's purple fingers. "Let me hold one for you." She took the heavy bag. It smelled of onions and cheap detergent. It was heavy. It was real. The old woman looked surprised, then grateful. "Bless you," she said. Eleanor Vance stood in the middle of the crowded bus, wet, broke, and anonymous. She looked at the billboard one last time as the bus pulled away, leaving Julian Sterling behind in the distance. She wasn't the queen of the sky anymore. She was just a woman, holding an onion bag for a stranger on the Q60 bus. And for the first time in 60 years, as she stood there with aching feet and a ruined ego, she felt something strange. She felt human. The bus drove on into the rain. Eleanor Vance spent a lifetime believing that her net worth determined her human worth. She thought that a first-class ticket gave her the license to treat others as debris in her path. But at 30,000 feet, she learned a brutal lesson. Status is fragile, but character is permanent. She tried to use her power to crush a man she saw as beneath her, only to discover he was the architect of her entire world. The higher she tried to climb by stepping on others, the harder she fell when the floor was pulled out from under her. In the end, karma didn't just take her money. It took her ego. It stripped her down to the bare essentials and forced her to live in the very world she had tried so hard to rise above. She lost the view from the penthouse, but perhaps, standing on that crowded bus, holding a stranger's groceries, she finally found the one thing she never had in the first-class lounge, her own humanity. This story is a powerful reminder that you never know who you're sitting next to, so treat everyone with respect. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes at the auction? Would you have helped Eleanor? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.